Are we heading towards an EGM crisis in the land-based slot sector? Hello and welcome to the Reports podcast, sponsored by Lean On. Discussing my topic today is John Lancaster, industry slot specialist with over 30 years working for some of the industry's biggest slot manufacturers, including IDT, Light & Wonder, and currently an independent consultant. John, welcome to the podcast.
Hi Lewis, thank you.
Great to see you. The headline for the podcast is Slots Floor Shakeup. And I want to split our discussion into two parts. The first being the problem and the second the solution. In this first part, I want to address the risks for casinos operating on aging slot floors and look at how misaligned investments and product cycles can erode future revenues. John, in your opinion, what's causing the disconnect between EGM replacement cycles and player expectations?
I think there's a number of reasons. Definitely over the last 10, 15 years, we've seen a degradation in the amount of capex that's available for slot machine purchasing. Now, there are a number of reasons for that. One, obviously, is COVID in recent times. There's a lot of operators went through a difficult period, having to borrow funds to stay afloat and so on. So that debt has to be repaid. But that's a unique and specific issue that will eventually go away. But higher taxation in many countries is reducing the available pots. AML regulation, player protection measures. Competition from other sectors. You know, young people now have far more opportunities to spend their money with endless festivals and other media forms of entertainment that they can. So they've basically seen all the operators, not necessarily every country in the same measure, because obviously the European market in particular is a bit of a patchwork quilt, but in general I think every operator is suffering from reduction in the number of players and an aging population. That's led to less machines being replaced each year. I can look back at replacement cycles of 15 to 20% going back 10, 15 years. Now it's more like, with certain exceptions, it's more like 5 to 7%. Now, you do the math, that's a 15, 20-year replacement cycle. And the other challenge, of course, is that technology is moving much faster. In the old days, and forgive me for remembering this, it shows my length of time in this industry, but mechanical reels would last 25 years, and it was easy to fix them, it was easy to maintain them. Now, with components in short supply or obsolescence cycles being very fast, a machine really has a life of maybe 5, maximum 10 years, because manufacturers then have to forward buy all the components, and in a lot of cases they're not even able to source those components unless they've bought ridiculous amounts up front, which is a huge risk, without knowing how the platform is going to perform, how the content's going to perform. And of course, there's a desire to innovate and keep bringing new products out. So there's a mismatch now that's been created between how long the operators want to keep or have to keep their products, and how long the manufacturers are actually supporting those platforms or can support those platforms, not necessarily a desire to. And the other thing, of course, is the pace of innovation now is very fast. The manufacturers are constantly bringing out new platforms with higher capacities. The hardware is evolving, bigger screens, more high tech, and their game designers quite obviously want to be developing the best games on the latest platform. So what that means is that the platforms that were released maybe 3 or 4 years ago are now not getting the same level of resources to continue to develop content on those platforms. So all this points to a need to replace that hardware, probably ideally every 5 years, but realistically between 5 and 10 years, depending on how long the manufacturer can support the platform. Okay. Now, clearly that's a challenge, because the two scenarios are incompatible.
Okay, and do you think the current crop of offerings of EGMs are actually aligned with modern player behavior? Are we creating the right products for the existing audience?
I think manufacturers are. From experience working with manufacturers, there is a range of products. They address the casual player. They try to attract new players. They're obviously addressing the regular players that are spending a lot of money on the products. and they are trying to take the players on a journey from their first visit, simple games that they can play without risk, without losing money, without having to, without over complex content, and then they take them on a journey. So I do think that the manufacturers are developing the right content. There's a couple of areas where they're looking at and they need to probably develop further. So, for example, the online content is clearly resonating with the young people. The young people are very tech savvy. They want to move on fast. They want flexibility to be able to switch between. They're doing it on their phones, on their devices, and so on. And to get those people into the casinos, the slot machine manufacturers, I think, have to look at what makes those games tick, what makes those players play those games, and they have to try and bring those learnings into the land-based products. Now, of course, the casinos themselves have to find ways of getting those people into the casinos, and that can be done through the omni-channel approach by being able to use the data from what they're learning online and apply it to the land-based. In the case where the land-based operators are also in the online space, but generally, I think yes. I think the manufacturers are developing the right games. They're on top of the trends. They're constantly trying to evaluate and assess what players are looking for, what works, what doesn't work. And there's this balance between doing what works, which is kind of a safe bet, because if you think a manufacturer is going to spend several $100,000 on developing a game, they have to take a view that, okay, we can innovate and we can experiment to a certain extent, but we also have to do what works, or we have to evolve what has worked and then take it to the next step. So there's kind of a three-pronged approach to game design, and I'm not a game designer, so I couldn't tell you exactly how they do that, but I do think that they've identified what players want, what players need, and they're bringing out content, and the performance demonstrates that. I mean, the performance of many manufacturers is excellent, and it demonstrates that they are doing what the players want.
So, I mean, is the issue, and you mentioned about the replacement cycle. How, as a generalisation, but how much capex is actually being deferred, and what are the specific risks that poses?
How much has been deferred? Well, I mean, it's been halved effectively over, and I'm talking about big operators who are leading operators in the business throughout Europe, without mentioning any names. You would expect these people, they expect these groups to have the funds to continue to invest. Their budgets are as low as they've ever been. So I think that's where the train smash is coming, because in 10 years' time they're going to have the vast majority of their floor with hardware that is impossible to support from a technical standpoint, but content neither. So unless it runs without problem and they don't have to remove it, they're gonna have a major problem, and that's really where the problem lies, is that it's just been too long in coming, this situation that year after year after year, reduce capex, only investing in a handful of products per property, and the rest of the floor is. And where does that lead? Well, it's leading to games that no longer perform because they are old and the players lose interest. Players are looking for innovation. They're looking for new things, in the same way that they would not go to a discotheque or a cinema that's not been renovated, or there's no new movie. They come into a casino, they see the same games, they get turned off, and they'll go and do something else. And of course, the technical problems on those machines will force the operators to either turn them off. If they cannot replace them, then there's going to be a reduction in the floor. What does that mean? At peak times, when they have full capacity, they won't have enough machines to be able to support the players that they have on the floor, or they won't have the diversity to appeal to a broad base of players.
So I was going to ask you if there's a growing mismatch between aging hardware and software innovation. It sounds like there is. How big is that gap, John? How big is the gap between what's being innovated now and what we're seeing on floors?
Well, I mean, I guess the replacement cycles give that answer, because if they're only replacing 5 to 7% per year, a major manufacturer is probably developing 100 machines, 100 games per year. Now, not 100 games don't find their way into every single jurisdiction. Certain games are designed for certain markets. But to give you some context, if a casino floor in Europe is 250 machines and they're replacing 10%, that's 25 machines. If they're replacing 5%, obviously it's 12 machines. And that's coming from multiple manufacturers. So you're starting to slice the pie very, very thinly. How much innovation per manufacturer? One manufacturer gets 30% of 12 machines on the floor. He's getting 4 games. That's nothing in terms of, that's the tip of the iceberg of what that manufacturer has produced. So that tells you that each year going on that floor is a subset of some of the best content being developed by, because there's no doubt that the manufacturers are developing a lot of content and they're developing good content, but only a fraction of that is finding its way onto the floor. And here's the other problem, is in order to attract new players and to develop players that have come for the first time and maybe they came back for the second time, you need a specific type of content to do that. But if your selection is based on, I only have 4 machines to buy from that manufacturer, I'm going to go for the 4 machines which I know will do 2 and 3, 4 times average. They're not being played by new players. They're not being played by a young guy that's just coming in for the first time. They're being played by the elderly, wealthy, frequent player who comes week in, week out, and probably is part of the 20%, generating 80% of the floor. So there's a mismatch there in that they are putting products on the floor, but they're only addressing the players that they already know, which generate a lot of money, which is fine, but it's not going to help them grow their player base, and it's not going to help them bring new players into the property.
So final question for this podcast, John. In your opinion, does the delay in the replacement cycle lead to a systemic decline in slot performance across markets? Is this something that just kind of spirals us down?
Yeah, I don't think it's going to, to my earlier point, I don't think it's going to diminish the performance, because what goes on the floor generally is working very well. It will cause a problem in the overall performance on the floor, because the lack of innovation, the lack of refreshment, the lack of placement of new products on the floor will drag down the overall average, because there's no new content, there's no new boxes going on the floor. So there's nothing to attract players who come in and say, oh, that's new, I'll play, or they hear that the competition has this, or the other property down the road has that. If those products don't find their way onto the floor, then yes, I mean, generally, it's a vicious spiral. The casino will not be able to attract people, it will not be able to retain people, and therefore people will ultimately stop coming. So the performance of the casino in general will start to drop unless they can find a way of putting new products on the floor and refreshing it.
Okay. Thanks, John. I'm looking forward to our next discussion when we talk about some of the possible solutions to what is an EGM crisis right now. Thank you. I look forward to speaking to you next.
Thanks, Lewis. Thank you.
Thanks.
Bye.